They adorned themselves with golden crowns, yet their physical forms narrated a different tale. With spines contorted, hands trembling, and minds shattered beneath heavy robes and royal insignias, these were kings destined for the chronicles of history, yet tragically flawed by nature. In a time when any sign of weakness was viewed as treason, they reigned with unspoken inner turmoil, enduring silently, defiantly, and fighting their own battles. This is not merely a story of victory. It is a somber procession of compromised power, veiled ailments, and thrones supported by the heavy weight of denial. Welcome to the hidden side of royalty, untouched by marble carvings. We delve into the lives of British monarchs grappling with concealed disabilities and deformities, and prepare for revelations that may unsettle. But before we plunge deeper into this royal labyrinth, take a moment to subscribe. Your support keeps this intriguing piece of history alive. And let's engage. Tell us where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. Midnight in London? 3 a.m. in Sydney? Let's see who joins us in exploring the shadows of history. Alfred the Great of England, reigning from 871 to 899, has been idealized as a mythic figure, a scholar, a king, the protector of his domain, learning Latin in later years to translate sacred texts for his people, the man remembered for his dubious cakes. He stands as an emblem of British exceptionalism. However, beneath the layers of beloved lore and national pride lies a personal struggle. Alfred fought not just against Viking invaders but against a relentless enemy far closer to home, his own suffering. He endured intense, relentless pain, not the dramatized sort, but genuine, debilitating agony that would leave him doubling over during crucial meetings, desperately wishing for relief. From his youth, chronic illness plagued Alfred, with modern historians speculating it could have been Crohn's disease or another inflammatory bowel disorder. The symptoms align with recurring abdominal pain, digestive distress, weight instability, and overwhelming fatigue. He described his affliction as a sudden, unknown ailment that first struck around his wedding and never released its grip. Asa, his biographer, chronicled this with striking urgency, revealing its significance in the king's life. Alfred had to meticulously structure his days around his condition, his meals, rest, and strategies molded by it. How challenging it must have been to strategize the fate of a kingdom while fearing whether he would endure the next meal. In contemporary language, this meant coping with chronic inflammation, potential gut bleeding, and malnourishment. In Alfred's worldview, it was a divine curse, a punishment from God, perhaps for past transgressions or simply a test of his fortitude. It's telling that in the face of this, he deepened his commitment to piety and scholarship. His court transformed into an intellectual sanctuary, where the spirit could soar amidst physical decline. While his generals prepared their troops for battle, Alfred disciplined himself to rise to the occasion each day, despite the relentless adversity. And so he continued to fight, not only against the disintegration of his own body but also against external threats. The Viking raids were not cinematic spectacles but slow-motion horrors, methodical and brutal. Wessex stood as the last significant Anglo-Saxon stronghold, and he was perpetually outnumbered, undersupplied, and enduring severe physical torment. Yet, rather than succumb, he adapted creatively. He dismantled the traditional feudal warfare approach, overhauling his kingdom's military structure. A system of rotation enabled farmers to also serve as soldiers, while fortified burhs created a defensive web across the land. Through it all, Alfred turned to knowledge, reading, translating, contemplating. Most men falter inwardly when faced with physical betrayal, but Alfred gazed outward. Yet, these adaptations came at a cost. His illness was unrelenting, flaring during critical moments of crisis, battles postponed, public appearances minimized. It isn't difficult to envision some of his retreats into solitude less as moments of quiet reflection and more as desperate efforts to navigate an unseen tempest. The whispers of his commanders about his challenges remain extinguished from the historical record. Back then, as now, public scrutiny punished any visible frailty. A sick king was a vulnerable king, and Alfred had no shortage of adversaries who preferred a sovereign free from debilitating agony. In all this, echoes of the modern world resonate. Public personas shrouded in private suffering, leaders upheld by myths while grappling with fragile bodies. We idolize our heroes as invincible. But what if their imperfections are integral to their greatness? What if Alfred's triumphs stemmed not in spite of, but because of his illness? He understood the relentless nature of a struggle that defied logic, something that crashed over him in waves, unyielding. He fought the Danes with cunning, while enduring his own battle with raw resilience, both enemies leaving deep marks, yet only one truly prevailed. When he departed this world in 899, his affliction remained fierce, consuming, and secretive. He had not escaped but rather held steadfast. However, Alfred was not alone in his suffering. His journey marks merely the beginning of a lineage of royals concealed under the weight of their own struggles. Kings cloaked in finery, discreetly hiding bodies in revolt. Some faced eating challenges, others struggled with mobility. In the aftermath of a great ruler, a shadow of a man emerged, scarcely able to eat or walk, but still he ruled. Idrid, the reluctant monarch, who could only savor the juices of his meals, stands as a figure of contradiction, a king with a crown but no appetite. The year was 946, a time when history rarely spared a thought for kings who could not feast. The youngest son of Edward the Elder, Idrid was eclipsed by the might of his war-hardened kin. He wasn't the commanding presence of his half-brother, Athlin, nor did he possess the cunning expected of royalty. Yet, destiny had cast him in gold and velvet. In the bleakness of the 10th century, ruling meant strength, but Idrid could barely partake in his royal bounty. Stricken with a peculiar ailment, he became a monarch who extracted sustenance without the ability to chew, an image of regal decay. His reign, though brief, tells a chilling story of a body in revolt, crowned in 946 after the untimely murder of his brother, Edmund I. Just 30 years old, sharp-witted yet entrapped in a failing body, he faced a cruel irony, the overseer of unified kingdoms, impotent over his own digestive fate. At sumptuous feasts, where others gorged in playful excess, Idrid sat austere, the absence of hearty laughter and bustling joy starkly noticeable. Quietly sipping instead, he became more a patient than a king, managing his strength with an air of stoic endurance. Scholars today still speculate about the exact nature of his ailment. Could it have been Crohn's disease or a degenerative disorder? No definitive diagnosis exists, yet one fact is clear. His suffering was apparent even to political foes. Despite his frail condition, Idrid's influence expanded, particularly in Northumbria, a land caught in the crosswinds of Viking authority. When they rallied behind the Norse pretender Eric Bloodaxe, Idrid responded with a fierce retaliation in 948, ordering the brutal sacking of Ripon, a decisive act that appended Eric's tenuous rule and sent shockwaves through the region. Incredibly, while his body failed him, Idrid solidified his grip as the unchallenged ruler of the English. This dark irony deepened, as he appeared so weak yet commanded such political prowess. Questions remained about how he sustained power. Some point to competent allies, like the future Archbishop Dunstan, while others suggest his fierce spirit propelled him through the duties of kingship. Regardless, signs of decline were apparent by 955, with reports indicating he was noticeably frail and his voice weakened. Whispers, perhaps exaggerated, hinted that he required aid at council meetings, a sobering image in a time demanding masculinity and strength. Yet, those who dared to confront him were soon silenced. His reign, though seemingly delicate, was fortified with the strength of iron. Idrid succumbed to his afflictions in 955 after 9 challenging years on the throne. By then, his illness had forfeited his vitality, and he left behind no heirs, merely a kingdom grappling with the legacy of union he forged. As he drew breath for the last time, Dunstan was by his side, a confidant and cleric witnessing the tragic end of a monarch whose reign survived in memory long after his body had failed. His tale poses a haunting question. When does a king's suffering transform him into something more, a symbol, a cautionary whisper through the ages? We remember Idrid because his ghost echoes in every leader bearing invisible burdens, smiling through pain, convincing those around them of their unyielding nature. And behind him looms William the Conqueror, a figure transformed by the relentless tide of time, rendered almost unrecognizable by daunting weight. As the chapters of history unfold, 2 kings down, 23 more await, and the shadows still beckon. If you remain till this concluding note, it's clear you've an affinity for unraveling the enigmatic corners of history. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, for the next tale awaits. Share with us in the comments where your watch begins and how the hour strikes in your world. Is this a midnight binge into the uncanny, or perhaps a morning dive into royal turmoil? William I, better known as William the Conqueror, is a name that echoes through history long before many truly grasped the meaning of conquest. This notorious Duke of Normandy, with sword in hand, crossed the English Channel, vanquished the Saxons at Hastings, and dramatically altered the landscape of English history. The tale is often told cleanly and triumphantly, where the foreign victor becomes monarch, erects castles, commissions a national survey, and meets his end with quietude. Yet, this narrative glosses over the complexities. William, with all his ruthless effectiveness and monumental achievements, was also a man whose body slowly betrayed him. It wasn't a tragic flash of fate or a grand assassination. Rather, it was a gradual cascade of decline, a slow unraveling that modern medicine might diagnose as morbid obesity, mingled with chronic injuries, and exacerbated by the wear of warfare, aging, and unchecked dominion. Despite this, he continued his reign. William was born around 1028 to Robert Duke of Normandy and Herivia, a woman of lesser rank. His illegitimacy could have cast a shadow on his future prospects, but instead, it fueled his relentless ambition. The label of bastard lingered throughout his life, but so did his sword. He learned early on that power must be seized, not given. It was achieved through force, intimidation, and a stubborn refusal to be underestimated. By the time he grasped the English crown in 1066, he was no stranger to the brutalities of warfare. He was toughened, tactical, and instilled with fear. However, the toll of his lifestyle was evident. Chroniclers depicted him as heavy-set and robust, yet not agile. Over the years, this physical weight escalated into something more burdensome. By the end of his reign, he was often described as corpulent and sluggish, encumbered by a body that limited his mobility. Once a warrior capable of scaling fortifications, he now traveled with caution, only to places that could accommodate his size, necessitating custom-made armor. The mythological image of William charging at Hastings starkly contrasts with the man weighed down by both metal armor and his own expanding body. And in the court, as is customary, the truth was overlooked. Unquestioned was the king's shape, as his subjects were acutely aware of his power. The narrative of strength, health, and invulnerability persisted. Yet, inconvenient truths have a way of breaking through. In 1087, William undertook a campaign in Normandy to quell a rebellion, proving once more his military might. However, fate dealt a cruel hand. During the siege of Mantes, an unfortunate accident occurred. His horse reared, sending him crashing against the saddle's metal pommel. The blow to his abdomen was catastrophic for a man already in declining health. Infection quickly set in, and his fragile internal condition faltered. His demise was neither grand nor heroic but protracted, agonizing, and undignified for a ruler once holding dominion over kingdoms. Reports suggest that after his passing, his body grotesquely swelled, complicating funeral arrangements. The symbolism here is striking. Even in death, William's form resisted containment. The conqueror of England could not master his own physical decline. This serves as his true legacy, not merely monuments and annals of history, but the image of a ruler who built vast empires yet ultimately lost control of what mattered most, himself. A king too large for his own armor, too heavy for the legacy he once crafted. A mortal, unable to secure the tidy narrative his scribes would have preferred. If William's journey embodies the gradual failure of the body, the next tale offers a stark reversal. What if betrayal never occurred at all? What if one was born into a form that casts suspicion in the eyes of the throne? What becomes of Richard? Not the Lionheart, but a different kind of ruler altogether. In the annals of history, Richard III stands as a convoluted figure. The year is 1483, and his ascension to the throne was neither predestined nor desired by the political elite. He was the younger sibling, an overshadowed figure to the charismatic Edward IV. Within the grand narrative of English royalty, Richard emerges not as a celebrated ruler, but as an infamous character, a tale spun from the strands of victory and defeat. Yet, beyond the tales of villainy perpetuated by Shakespeare and historical accounts lies an unsettling reality waiting to be unveiled. It wasn't until 2012, 5 centuries after his passing, that Richard's remains were unearthed beneath a car park in Leicester. His body, curled like a question mark, nestled in a grave so unceremonious, challenged the narrative of a monstrous king. This twisted form was not merely a product of metaphor. Indeed, Richard suffered from scoliosis, a significant spinal deformity that altered his very essence. His posture deviated, with one shoulder raised higher, and a rib cage that threatened to collapse inwards, a physical reality starkly contrasting the expectations of his royal facade. When the legend of Richard took shape, it was often marred with political motives. Historians and playwrights of later centuries demonized him, leading to the perception of a grotesque tyrant. Yet, eyewitnesses of his time painted a different image, a man of slight stature, but one who commanded respect for his military skill and legal reforms. The narrative of deformity didn't enter the public domain until it served a political purpose, distorting his legacy and amplifying the distance between the man and the myth. Richard's condition didn't inhibit his will. Rather, it fueled his resolve. He fashioned specialized armor to combat his physical challenges, adapting through daily life with a strategic precision that spoke to his intelligence and ambition. His reign, though brief, was marked by genuine reforms, protecting land rights, improving the legal framework, and ensuring laws were accessible to all. Such undertakings reflected not madness, but a desperate need for legitimacy in a world quick to question his fitness to rule. As he met his fate on the battlefield at Bosworth Field in 1485, Richard's refusal to yield became a poignant statement in itself. He fought valiantly, and his end came not from cowardice but a fierce tenacity, leaving a complex legacy clouded by perception rather than reality. This is a reminder of the harsh truths about the politics of power and public image, especially for those whose appearances diverge from the norm. Next comes the figure of Henry IV, a king whose afflictions were hidden beneath skin rather than bone, yet whose physicality drew intense scrutiny and fascination in a world far less forgiving than the one we navigate today. The saga of these kings exposes the deep-rooted belief that aesthetics often dictate power, a notion as resonant now as it was in their time. Henry IV, England, R. 1399 to 1413. A figure born not to rule, yet he claimed the crown. As the offspring of John of Gaunt, cousin to Richard II, and the founder of the Lancastrian dynasty, Henry Bolingbroke was a master of both courtly grace and cold political strategy. He maintained the attributes of a nobleman: athletic, appealing, and exceptionally educated. However, his destiny shifted dramatically. He rose from nobleman to king, albeit through a turbulent journey marked by the deposition of Richard II, whose erratic reign drove Henry to assert his claim draped in the guise of justice. Notably, while others had attempted to dethrone monarchs before, Henry was the first to succeed and endure long enough to feel the weight of his actions. Yet, as Henry ascended to kingship, he found himself battling an unseen antagonist. This was no sudden affliction. Rather, it crept into his life like an impenetrable mist, an illness that began subtly with fatigue and increased withdrawal from public duties. As the years progressed, alarming signs emerged. Skin eruptions and lesions publicly marred his countenance, prompting speculation about eczema, psoriasis, or more severe ailments. Despite various theories, including one that hinted at syphilis, none confirmed his condition with any certainty. Henry's plight was more than a mere medical issue. It posed a theological dilemma. In medieval belief, a king's physical state was intertwined with his spiritual essence. His illness became a grim message, a potential reprisal for usurping Richard II's throne. Ironically, despite his visible decline, Henry's intellect remained sharp. Though often shrouded in seclusion, he continued his responsibilities, governing from a distance, missing parliamentary meetings, and strategically delegating military tasks. Even as his image as a king began to fracture under the weight of his malady, Henry never renounced his authority. Instead, he chose resilience amidst adversity, reigning for 14 grueling years through turmoil, personal suffering, and political discord. His legacy was solidified not just as the first of his lineage, but as a testament to the endurance of a monarch navigating the precarious balance between illusion and reality. As whispers of discontent grew in his court, Henry's reign was marked by personal battles that culminated in sudden episodes of unconsciousness, even while in sacred spaces like Westminster Abbey. Rather than succumb to the whispers of defeat, he would awaken, defiantly demanding dignity in his royal existence. His passing came in 1413 at the age of 45, his reign a tapestry of unrest, but paradoxically, also of stability. With him gone, the crown passed to his son, Henry V, who would be celebrated on stages in both history and literature. The tale of Henry IV lingers uneasily with us, raising profound questions about the obligations of kingship, between strength and the facade of strength. It beckons us to ponder the price of maintaining such a facade, particularly when the burden grows harsher. Thus, we shift our focus to another monarch who faced a different kind of unraveling, not through physical disfigurement, but through a gradual loss of sanity, a ruler whose internal collapse cast a shadow over the entire court, whispering the forbidden truth, broken. In the annals of English history, Edward VI often drifts into the shadows, overshadowed by the tumultuous reign of Henry VIII and the formidable presence of Elizabeth I. This young ruler, born in 1537, can seem more like an interlude than a king, merely a child caught in the tempest of succession. Edward ascended the throne at the tender age of 9 after his father's death in 1547, but the crown rested uneasily on his head, an emblem of power wrested from his frail hands. An ambitious reformer by upbringing, he never had the chance to stand up for the very changes he was meant to champion. His reign was marred by fragility, The illness that plagued him was not just a medical concern, but a ticking clock that signified a political urgency. His mother, Jane Seymour, passed shortly after his birth, leaving behind a nation that alternately mourned and sighed in relief at the arrival of a male heir, a beacon of hope, yet an irony in the making. Edward, raised in a Protestant environment by fervent reformist tutors, was envisioned as the living embodiment of the new religious order. Scholars sought to instill in him not just education in scripture and language, but also a sense of purpose that connected faith with governance. As Edward wore the crown, he remained a puppet to the powerful adults around him. His uncle, Edward Seymour, and later John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, wielded the real power, with the boy king receding further into obscurity. Portraits from his reign reveal a poised and delicate figure, yet behind that composed facade lurked a grim truth. His health was rapidly deteriorating. Initially overlooked as mere childhood ailments, by early 1553, the deterioration became stark. Edward was not just ill, he was wasting away before the eyes of a court that preferred to veil the truth. Modern historians largely agree that he succumbed to tuberculosis, a slow and merciless disease that allowed him to comprehend the extent of his decline. Beneath his frail exterior, Edward's political fire burned brighter as the shadows thickened around him. With diminishing strength, he aggressively advanced Protestant reforms, revised crucial religious texts, and supported radical clergy, clinging desperately to the vision he believed was his divine duty. His condition and the struggle for succession loomed large, an unsettling truth haunting his young reign as he faced an uncertain future. In the intricate tapestry of English history, two pivotal figures stand out: Mary and Elizabeth. Mary, the elder half-sister, was firmly Catholic, a steadfast keeper of the Old Mass and the Latin rites. In contrast, Elizabeth held a more ambiguous stance, a former Protestant who opted for political silence. As Edward's health declined, he faced a daunting choice. He couldn't risk naming either sister as his heir. Instead, he redirected his legacy towards his cousin, Lady Jane Grey, a devout young Protestant, and conveniently linked to the Dudley family who wielded influence over the Regency Council. This decision wasn't one born out of rebellion, but rather an act of preservation from a king aware of his impending end. And then, silence enveloped the court. Edward, just 15, passed away in July 1553. News of his death hung heavily, with official announcements lagging behind the swirl of courtly intrigue. The scramble to place Jane on the throne was frantic but fell short. Mary quickly gained momentum, rallying her supporters to usurp the throne within mere days. Tragically, Lady Jane Grey faced execution the following year, while Edward, who had always feared a fleeting reign, became merely a flickering hope extinguished too soon. Even in his death, Edward's legacy lingers, not defined by his actions but rather by his inabilities. He could not survive, nor dictate his legacy. The crown placed upon his young head was a burden he had not fully grasped. He wasn't alone in this plight of frail health. Following Edward, the throne would later be seized by the kingmaker, who carved out power amid the wreckage of conflict, only to find himself trapped within a deteriorating body. Edward VI, the elusive monarch who often vanishes amidst the historical drama of Henry VIII and the indomitable Elizabeth I, serves as a mere footnote, a king who never matured into adulthood, a reformer who couldn't uphold his reforms. Born in 1537 to Henry VIII and Jane Seymour, Edward was meant to symbolize stability. However, his early years were marked by profound loss, with his mother succumbing just days after childbirth. The nation sighed with relief. Finally, a son, a hoped-for future seemed momentarily assured. Yet, the tides of irony flowed swiftly. Edward became the first monarch educated as a Protestant from infancy, nurtured by fervent reformists. Upon Henry's death in 1547, Edward ascended to the throne at just 9 years old, anointing him in grandeur yet stripping him of true control as power shifted to adult guardianship. His fragile frame, depicted in formal portraits, belied the spectre of illness lurking underneath, a truth increasingly impossible to conceal. The early ailments of youth morphed into a debilitating condition. By early 1553, as Edward's health crumbled, his desperation escalated for Protestant reform. With an urgent political maneuver, he altered the line of succession. Identifying Mary and Elizabeth as risks, the elder steadfastly Catholic and the younger politically ambiguous, he designated Lady Jane Grey as his successor. Edward's last act was a desperate attempt to secure the Protestant future of England. Yet once he vanished, chaos reigned in the court. The effort to thrust Jane into power unravelled, and in a matter of days, Mary reclaimed the throne. Edward's brief existence came to an end, embodying an extinguished light, the Protestant promise dimmed before it could flourish. In the corridors of power and over the years, Edward's story unveils a pivotal truth, a legacy shaped not by triumph but by the shadows of mortality and the weight of crown-born obligations. Henry Tudor. Henry VIII, the monarch who seized the throne, only to spend his days grappling with the consequences. It all began in England, 1485, with a gamble born not of fervour or certainty, but of desperation. Unlike many kings, Henry VII had no great army or wealth to support his claim, but a lineage tangled with complexities that would make even the most astute scholar squint. He relied on creating alliances, weaving stories, arranging marriages, and most crucially, mastering the art of silence. Rather than storming into power with bravado, he slipped in discreetly. Yet, there lies a truth about leaders who attain their positions through calculation rather than charm. They continue to scheme long after victory, forever haunted by the same strategies that earned them power. For Henry, this meant ruling with distrust and weary vigilance, always on guard against betrayal. By his death in 1509, he had architected the Tudor dynasty, subdued the nobility, laid the foundation for a fledgling bureaucracy, and amassed a treasury that would make his notoriously extravagant son seem frugal by comparison. Yet beneath this seemingly successful ascendance, Henry's health was deteriorating, a slow and painful decline that crept up on him like shadows at dusk. His afflictions did not manifest in a single jarring incident. Instead, they were a persistent cadence of ailments that compounded as his political anxiety intensified. Reports from his twilight years painted a picture of cyclical fevers, respiratory distress, and diminished mobility, potentially a blend of tuberculosis and chronic respiratory conditions. His contemporaries noted his consumption-like appearance, a term for an illness that visibly wasted its victim. Then, there were the bouts of gout, often trivialized in history as a royal ailment tied to indulgence. Yet in his era, gout was a relentless foe, transforming mundane tasks into agonizing endeavors. The vigor that once defined Henry began to erode alongside his health. The ruler who once commanded the court with physical prowess now found himself confined, his public engagement shortened. The stark reality of his declining body paralleled his reign, a calculated defense against a world rife with uncertainty. Henry's silence about his health allowed the official tale to persist unblemished, yet the distance in his presence loomed larger. Portraits grew more reserved, showing a king increasingly isolated. After the death of his wife, Elizabeth of York, in 1503, a palpable shift occurred in the royal household. Their marriage had been unsettlingly harmonious, yet her passing alongside their son's death left Henry in profound solitude. Contemplations of remarriage with figures like Margaret of Savoy and Queen Joanna of Naples yielded no alliances. Fatigued by both politics and grief, Henry VIII remained a widower, as though the meticulous machinery he had constructed had ultimately outrun him. His latter years were punctuated by stringent fiscal controls, rising taxes, and mounting grievances among the populace. Retreating into administration, he delved into the minutiae of governance, finding solace in managing budgets as his health waned. By 1509, Henry's physical state deteriorated to a point where he was confined to bed, with vague records cataloguing his decline. His will was prepared. His son, a mere 7 years old, was poised to ascend. And just like that, Henry VIII faded, without a flourish, merely concluding a life carefully orchestrated. Yet, upon his passing, his dynasty ignited with renewed fervor. His son would dismantle in 5 years what took Henry 2 decades to establish. Alliances crumbled, conflicts renewed, and extravagance surged as the treasury emptied. The twilight of Henry's influence whispered of cautionary tales, but the significance of his illness remains. It did not define him. Instead, it illustrated his resilience, ruling through quiet determination rather than spectacle. His waning body echoed the silence of his reign, gradually withdrawing until both the man and the monarch vanished from the narrative. Henry VIII etched a profound legacy, resonating through time, not solely for his separation from Rome or his infamous marriages, but for a reign defined by the paradox of power and frailty. Arriving on the throne as an embodiment of Renaissance vigor, athletic, golden-haired, beloved, he was a ruler who hunted and jousted without restraint. However, the tides turned following a catastrophic fall in 1536 during a jousting competition. Thrown from his steed, Henry suffered severe injuries that left him in a slow recovery spiral. The leg wound plagued him for years, rife with infections that left subtle hints cloaked in courtly language. His mobility diminished, but still, he maintained appearances. Gradually, the man once celebrated for his agility and stamina transformed into a figure reliant on aids and contrivances. Ironically, the very control Henry sought over his kingdom, his lineages, and the church slipped through his fingers, leaving him vulnerable to the physical decline he battled. In his fascination with royal legacies, he bore the weight of painful reality, his own body. As his strength diminished, his decrees swelled with authority. Jealousy, suspicion, and rage shaped his governance as he desperately tried to maintain the image of the robust king he once was. With each marriage, divorced from emotion and steeped in legacy, the distance between his reality and facade widened. The vibrant sovereign became increasingly withdrawn. By the time of his death in 1547, relief lingered in the air of the court, not out of disdain, but because the strain of his reign had become untenable. In his absence, however, the echoes of his suffering lingered, as the ensuing king, James Stuart, faced the lingering shadows of a legacy built on pain and perception. In the tale of James VI and I, spanning the years from 1567 to 1625, we encounter a man burdened with crowns yet hindered by a frail body. Ascending to the throne of Scotland at a mere 13 months, and later taking control over England and Ireland by the age of 36, James was the first to unite the crowns of the British Isles, not through military conquests but by a twist of fate and the untimely demise of predecessors in the turbulent Tudor line. When he set foot in London, James was a perplexing figure, Scottish in speech, English in ambition, molded by a European upbringing. Yet, his physical presence did not align with the expectations of a monarch. From a young age, sources depicted him as awkward and unstable, described as knock-kneed and straying far from the noble elegance typically favoured at court. Rumours of a limp or ungainly gait circulated, with whispers of his struggles to mount a horse unaided. This lack of grace was accompanied by health issues. Some historians surmise he suffered from rickets in childhood, a diagnosis that would later define his royal experience. His ascent was fraught with challenges. Crowned as a baby, orphaned politically by his mother Mary, Queen of Scots, and constantly under scrutiny from a host of tutors and regents, James didn't merely claim a throne, he survived to inherit it. As a teenager, he withstood countless kidnappings and political upheavals, all while battling his own fragile health. Beset by asthma, tremors, and pain from kidney stones, he faced the struggles of his body head-on, adopting a strategic mindset. Where his physical prowess fell short, his intellect flourished. With a steady hand, James crafted expansive writings, treatises on kingship, explorations of witchcraft, and profound theological arguments, illuminating his complex relationship with power and the divine right of kings. However, the weight of appearances often overshadowed his intellect. To counter his physical limitations, he enveloped himself in voluminous attire, surrounded himself with taller courtiers, and positioned himself carefully in portraits to conceal awkwardness. His public engagements were meticulously controlled. When he spoke, it was laden with both brilliance and wit, even if the nobles of the court whispered about his gait. James found himself overshadowed by the dazzling presence of Elizabeth I, whose theatrical charisma left his own charm feeling dull. His arrival at the English court was met with mockery, his limp, affectionate nature toward male courtiers, and his accent all points of ridicule. Yet, amidst the jests, James succeeded as a ruler, maintaining peace with Spain, dodging significant wars, commissioning the King James Bible, and presiding over the nascent British colonial endeavors. However, as the years waned, his health deteriorated. The pain intensified. Movement became a labor. Brief court appearances dwindled as he settled into solitude, his essence gradually eclipsed by exhaustion. When he passed away at the age of 58, it was not amid chaos but as a weary monarch, burdened by his legacy and the challenges of ruling from a body that constantly betrayed him. Yet, the essence of James' saga is one of resilience, of governing from the sidelines, advocating through clever words, and navigating a court that revered strength. His son, Charles, would rise next, striving to regain the majesty of kingship, shaped not just by his own frailty but by the weight of expectations and history that lingered in the air. In the tumultuous years between 1625 and 1649, a poignant saga unfolded around Charles I of England, a figure caught amid the divisions of Scotland and Ireland. Born the second son of James VI and Anne of Denmark, Charles emerged into a world that, from the very beginning, seemed mismatched with his frame. As a child, he struggled with physical limitations, unable to walk unaided until nearly 4, while his siblings thrived in the courtly culture of poise and agility. His condition remains a historical mystery, though whispers of rickets, a common affliction of the time, echo through the corridors of time, outlining a boy whose bones were frail and whose steps were unsteady. This delicate boy, marked by a stammer and a posture that seemed perpetually stiffened by invisible chains, faced a court where charisma was currency. Despite such overwhelming odds, his will was not easily broken. With determination, Charles retreated to the countryside, where his caretakers coaxed strength from his limbs through exercise and riding lessons. He eventually emerged stronger, mastering horsemanship and fencing, yet the shadows of his past remained, manifesting in a rigid demeanor that hinted at a man playing a role meant for someone else. As he ascended to the throne in 1625 after James's death, he married Henrietta Maria, a Catholic queen, which only intensified the existing tensions in an already discomfited Protestant realm. The Parliament eyed him with suspicion, discontent brewing over his decisions and cherished beliefs in monarchy as sacred and untouchable. When the rift grew, Charles did not seek a way to ease the tensions. He dissolved Parliament, lurching into a solitary rule. For 11 years, he governed directly, but beneath the facade of divine authority lay a fragile spirit. Charles battled chronic health issues that drained him physically. His voice faltered under the weight of power he felt unprepared to bear. Then, As the English Civil War erupted in 1642, the man once seen as delicate became an unlikely leader, leading royalist forces, yet persistently lagging behind the ever-evolving desires of his nation for modern governance. Ultimately, his journey ended in tragedy, as he was captured and executed in 1649. The image of him calmly walking to the scaffold in black with a sense of dignity belies the whispers of vulnerability that had haunted him throughout his life. He was a king molded by his frailties, standing firm in the face of unwavering scrutiny and strife. Yet, from the ashes of his rule, a legacy endured, for in the wake of a fallen king, a brother awaited to grasp the mantle, navigating the turbulent waters of their dynasty amidst the chaos that sought to reshape their era. In a moment suspended in time, we find Charles, exuding calmness. Yet, Charles II, his successor, was a tempest waiting to unfold. As England stood fractured between Scotland and Ireland, the shadows of history loomed large. If Charles I was the noble king who met his end with dignity, his son, Charles II, danced defiantly against fate. Born amidst civil war and raised in the spectre of exile, he ascended the throne after a decade steeped in republican ethos. A weary nation now craved liberation from Puritan strictures. Upon donning the crown, it was as if he unearthed a long-forgotten costume, and he wore it with a knowing grin. More jovial than his father, and a gifted orator surpassing his grandfather, Charles II navigated the court with an acute awareness of his narrow escape from being a mere footnote in history. Referred to as the Merry Monarch, he was a delightfully cynical figure, a patron of science and a lover of life's pleasures, including romance and revelry ignited by naval adventures. Yet, beneath his charismatic facade lay an enigma that clouded his reign, a recurring, inexplicable ailment that modern historians still dissect, as evidence of his condition presents more questions than answers. By the latter part of his rule, his health visibly degraded. Swollen limbs, fatigue, and muscle cramps marked his days. He disappeared from court with little notice, and reports from ambassadors hinted at afflictions vague enough to obscure the truth. Some posited a chronic kidney condition, while others speculated on a disturbing neurological disorder. Occasionally, alarming symptoms grip him: tremors, slurred speech, and fleeting lapses of consciousness. These were subtle yet undeniable, enough to raise eyebrows though not enough to instigate panic. Impervious to such weaknesses, Charles was acutely aware of the peril posed by gossip that could erode his reign. He played the role of a strong leader, maintaining a tight inner circle of confidants and medical advisors sworn to discretion. But in the spring of 1685, pretenses crumbled when fate intervened. One ordinary morning at Whitehall, as he dressed, he was violently seized by a sudden convulsion, falling unceremoniously to the ground amidst the frantic chaos of his attendants. In a flurry of activity, physicians arrived, armed with tinctures and leeches, each offering contradictory remedies. What ensued was a harrowing week marked by confusion and anguish, as his body descended into multiple organ failure. Fateful medical practices from venesection to herbal concoctions only hastened his decline. Fever gripped him. Swallowing became a near impossible task. Flitting between consciousness and oblivion, he issued heartfelt orders, bestowed blessings upon his illegitimate offspring, and even expressed his apologies for the prolonged distress he caused his courtiers. It was quintessentially Charles. The verdict at his passing was apoplexy, a bygone word for stroke. Yet, later investigations suggested the more probable causes of uremia stemming from kidney failure or a cascade of seizures prompted by significant electrolyte disturbances. But the crux of the matter transcends the immediate cause of death. Rather, the real intrigue lies in the tumultuous journey that led to it. Beneath the glimmering surface of Charles II's reign lurked persistent shadows. The very restoration of monarchy brought not just governance but also plague, fires, divisions in faith, and constant murmurings regarding legitimacy and mortality. Through extraordinary charisma and shrewd strategy, Charles maintained the facade of control. Yet the human body is indifferent to politics. It deteriorates with time. Behind the polished exterior, Charles was never truly healthy. He masked his afflictions with grace, danced around them, but ultimately, they could not be outsmarted. When his mask finally fell away, what remained was the legacy of a ruler who governed for 25 years, fathered numerous illegitimate children, dodged numerous assassination attempts, and ultimately succumbed to an ailment that eluded recognition until it was far too late. Upon his death, his brother James ascended the throne. Yet he could not rival Charles's charm, wit, or health. In the unfolding narrative of history, we find William III, King of England, a man who shunned the notion of being loved. Instead, his ambitions revolved around securing a Protestant succession, fortifying the alliance between the Dutch and English against the looming threat of France, and managing to survive the perils of his journey. Affection, in his view, played a secondary role to the necessity of existence. William of Orange was a figure marked by paradoxes, a foreign ruler yet somehow domestically legitimate, a staunch Calvinist in a realm shadowed by Catholic spectres, and a wartime leader struggling for breath in times of peace. His frail body symbolized this contradiction, tall but gaunt, his presence lacking regal grace. His features, sculpted for suspicion, presented a hollow-cheeked visage with deeply set, discerning eyes. However, theatre was of little interest to him. His essence was one of military instinct and resolute Protestant belief, relying not on charisma but an unyielding tenacity. But this tenacity was continually tested by his lifelong battle with asthma. This chronic condition, inadequately addressed by 17th-century medicine, left him perpetually gasping for air, vulnerable to triggers of cold, dampness, and stress. When he stepped onto London's damp landscape following the Glorious Revolution of 1688, Whitehall Palace proved intolerable. Thus began his retreat to Kensington and Hampton Court, where the air was cleaner, the drainage superior, and the space more forgiving. In this new geography, William's struggle was known among his court. Courtiers noted the audible signs of his labored breathing, while ambassadors observed his need for warmth and regular rest. Wrapped in cloaks, even in milder climates, beneath the heavy burdens of governance, he often slept in heated rooms, always prepared for nocturnal attacks on his frail health. Yet, in the throes of this personal turmoil, he was an unyielding force in military campaigns against Louis XIV's France. He rode alongside his troops, negotiated alliances, and meticulously planned strategies, pushing the boundaries of his compromised body. But time's relentless march brought misfortune. In 1702, at just 51, he suffered a devastating fall at Hampton Court when his horse stumbled, fracturing his collarbone. This injury, for a man with respiratory vulnerabilities, initiated a catastrophic decline. Pneumonia set in, his breathing became increasingly labored, and despite the array of period treatments, purgatives, cupping, and heated remedies, he faced the undeniable approach of death. He lingered for weeks, still clinging to governance, whispering decisions from a weakened frame until he finally succumbed in March 1702. In both life and death, he embodied a lingering paradox, invited by Parliament yet never truly embraced by the English public. Although he ruled over England, Scotland, and Ireland, he found solace only in the Netherlands. A heroic Protestant king seldom seen smiling, he redefined monarchy while gasping for breath. Yet his breathlessness marked the dawn of change. The House of Hanover was on the horizon, poised to lead Britain into a new chapter, commencing with George I, whose reign would evolve from stroke to silence amid the backdrop of Ireland's division once again. George, it was never his destiny to wear the English crown. Temperament, language, and even geography all spoke against him. Born within the electorate of Hanover, he was a quintessential German prince, stiff, orderly, efficient, and only mildly intrigued by British identity. English was a language he barely spoke, and he found the customs of his adopted country perplexing, even as his health began to falter. Yet, crowned in 1714 and summoned from the modest ranks of German nobility by the Act of Settlement, a decree that ensured only a Protestant could ascend to the throne, he, being 21st in line by blood but first by faith, was deemed suitable. It mattered not that he appeared aloof or often unintelligible to Parliament. His role was not to dazzle but simply to embody the monarchy within the established church. However, beneath the carefully crafted image of this distant foreign ruler, adorned with rich wigs and ceremonial regalia, George I was unwittingly descending into a state of physical decline. While other monarchs protected their ailing bodies behind veils of secrecy or political maneuvering, George's deterioration was a stark, visible reality, a gradual diminishing of strength that would tragically lead to a sudden and fatal collapse, far away from his true home in Hanover. By the year 1727, the king faced a grim situation. What was referred to as dropsy, a condition associated with heart or kidney failure, had taken hold. His face puffed, movements slowed, and appetite waned, while perceptible tremors invaded his hands and fatigue became his unwelcome companion. Averse to discussing his ailments, George was not one for sharing even within the gates of the English court. He preferred to speak German, communicate through actions, and remain shrouded in a sense of privacy. Yet, he still managed to fulfill his duties, ruling, riding, and participating in public ceremonies, functioning as a king. But behind the curtain, he gradually withdrew into the predictability of routines as he allowed ministers, particularly Robert Walpole, who many regarded as the first Prime Minister, to steer the complexities of British governance. George was the sovereign in title, but not in the day-to-day management of his reign, increasingly absent even when present. Then came the inevitable journey back to Hanover in June 1727. It was a comforting ritual for him, a summer escape that provided an illusion of vitality despite his deteriorating health. As he crossed the sea and traveled overland, he began to experience troubling symptoms: head pressure, headaches, nausea, and numbness, signs of an unseen cerebrovascular crisis. On the night of June 11th, at the Bishop's Palace in Osnabrück, George suffered a catastrophic stroke. He fell unconscious and never regained awareness, passing away the following morning, far from the London streets, from Westminster, and from a public that had never entirely embraced him. The king, who had struggled with the language and politics of his realm, was lost. Yet, his quiet passing unveiled an unsettling truth. A monarch's absence can precede death by years. The human body may deteriorate gradually, presence may fade, and authority may subtly shift, all without a single word or official notice. George departed as he had ruled, silently. His son, George II, now faced the formidable task of reigning with realities slipping into shadows. First the ears dulled, then the eyes faltered, while the throne continued the facade that nothing was amiss. In the annals of British history, the reign of George II, spanning from 1727 to 1760, reveals a compelling portrait of a monarch caught between worlds. Unlike his father, George I, who ruled England from a distance, George II seemed to embody his role, engaging in the affairs of state with a marked vigor. Yet, beneath this exterior lay a gradual unraveling, as he began losing his connection to reality. Born in Hanover, George II ascended the throne with a sense of ambivalence, much like receiving a complex gift. He was outwardly more dynamic and emotionally expressive compared to his predecessor. He held court meetings, surveyed his troops, clashed with ministers, and made history as the last British monarch to lead his soldiers into battle during the 1743 confrontation at Dettingen. Yet, beneath the fiery facade lurked a subtle decline that would come to define his later years. By the mid-1740s, George II's hearing had begun to falter. He found himself increasingly at a loss during discussions, often misinterpreting conversations and becoming irritable when struggling to hear. Those around him adapted, speaking louder and crafting written briefs to communicate effectively. Yet, these adjustments only underscored an emerging strain. The king's impatience began to surface during meetings as he interrupted or offered terse responses without fully grasping the reports. His interactions became mechanical, filled with stiff smiles and automatic nods, a reflection of an isolated figure in a world that was growing quieter around him. As time advanced, George II faced the inevitable deterioration of his eyesight. He found reading documents and recognizing faces from afar became increasingly challenging. Accounts of him squinting at speeches or requesting additional light, even in daylight, were not uncommon. Despite these struggles, he never publicly acknowledged his decline, an unspoken decree among monarchs of that era, where visible infirmity was kept private to avoid anything hinting at political weakness. George, adhering to this unspoken code, hid his struggles while still fulfilling his ceremonial duties, yet the nation began viewing him as little more than a symbolic figure. His reign ended abruptly in 1760 at the age of 76, likely due to an aortic aneurysm, a stark conclusion to a life that had dimmed sensorially over the years. With George II passing, history noted the crossing of significant thresholds. He was the last British king born outside the British Isles, the final monarch to be laid to rest in Westminster Abbey, and arguably the last to experience decline shrouded in the polite silence of a dignified court. The subsequent king would face an entirely different reality, one burdened with overwhelming perceptions, sensing the world fray at the edges of his consciousness. In the chronicles of history, the story of George III unfolds, a king whose decline sparked intrigue and mystery, confronting a dilemma no ruler wishes to encounter. What if the mind that bears the crown loses its grip on reality? The years 1760 to 1820 marked a reign that began with George III exhibiting clarity, purpose, and an unprecedented sharpness of mind. He was diligent, exceptionally literate, and fiercely dedicated, embodying qualities his ancestors hardly matched. Stemming from British soil and conversing fluently in English, he genuinely took interest in governance. Renowned for his photographic memory, thirst for scientific knowledge, and personal integrity, he led a life of remarkable restraint, free from gambling or infidelities, an exceptional feat for any king. Yet, amid the demands of a scrutinizing public and burgeoning political tensions, George's mind began to falter. The real tragedy lay not in the onset of madness but in his acute awareness of that descent, a terrifying journey he couldn't halt. Historians once attributed his condition to a peculiar metabolic disorder termed porphyria, perhaps instigated by stress or lifestyle. Symptoms included intense abdominal aches, muscle frailty, mental lapses, and notorious episodes of instability. However, new analyses of his written exchanges propose a more relatable diagnosis: bipolar disorder, potentially with psychotic features. No matter the precise classification, a discernible pattern emerged. His struggles unfolded in cycles. The first significant episode struck in 1788, at age 50, as he grappled with the aftermath of losing the American colonies and the mounting threats of reform and revolution. During this tumultuous time, George's behavior became erratic. His speeches grew frantic and hurried, leading him to pen frantic letters filled with jumbled thoughts. He oscillated between incessant talking and profound silence, often failing to recognize those around him and succumbing to religious fixations and weeping spells. A state of chaos enveloped his household, with doctors engaging in earnest yet fruitless discussions on treatment. As Parliament faced paralysis, plans were concocted for a regency, assigning power to his lavish son, the infamous Prince of Wales. Yet, surprisingly, before the transition could unfold, George re-emerged into his role as if nothing had transpired. The regency plans languished, ceremonies resumed, and Britain continued, albeit under an air of discomfort. The episodes of instability persisted, growing in frequency and intensity, the worst arriving in the early 1800s after the death of his cherished daughter, Princess Amelia, in 1810, an irreparable loss for a duty-bound king. Soon after, George slipped into a profound cognitive decline, retreating from the public eye and eventually ushering in a regency, with his son governing in his stead. The final decade of George III was spent predominantly within Windsor Castle, lost in a personal reality. He conversed with phantoms, played the harp endlessly, and imagined discussions with his long-gone ancestors, signing papers with nonsensical marks. The diligent ruler who once meticulously managed the affairs of state faded away, yet he remained king, carrying the title until his passing in 1820. The irony lay in his status. Though he reigned in name and representation, understanding eluded him. It was a unique tragedy. Unlike previous monarchs who lost bodily control, George lost his very essence. He could neither articulate his struggles nor resign from his position, as abdication was unthinkable in the 18th century. Thus, he ruled in silence while others steered the ship of state. His silent reign extended beyond a decade, culminating in a death met with not grief but relief, the conclusion of an unseen dominion. Yet, peace was fleeting. His son, already ruling as regent, assumed the throne amid unpopularity and echoes of hereditary burdens. The crown, instead of resting quietly, plunged into a world of excess and discontent. In the tumultuous era of early 19th century Britain, we encounter George IV, a monarch whose very existence was a living embodiment of excess. Reigning from 1820 to 1830, George IV was characterized not just by his titles but by a lavish lifestyle that set him apart in history. Where his father, George III, was marked by devotion and mental decline, George IV became synonymous with indulgence, a man consumed by extravagant clothes, sumptuous feasts, and the praise of those around him, all while suffering from the torment of gout. Once a dashing prince who wielded scandal as an artistic expression, he curated a vibrant circle of artists and intellectuals, and undeniably transformed Brighton into a fantastical getaway, crowned by the whimsically opulent royal pavilion. However, as the years progressed, his health withered, reducing him to a patchwork of ailments embedded within ornate garments. Gout, his most notorious adversary, shackled him physically for decades, rendering him helpless at times, reliant on aids for even the simplest transitions from room to room. By the 1820s, observers noted that even the slightest movements caused him distress, his struggle to maintain a dignified facade unmistakable. The king's battle with gout was intimately connected to his reckless lifestyle, a constant barrage of rich food and indulgent drink, long feasts that often stretched for hours. He had once reportedly devoured an astonishing 7 courses at one sitting, donning a velvet robe lined with fur. Additionally, his dependence on alcohol and opium-based remedies grew, pushing him deeper into a haze that transformed the once vibrant monarch into a bloated image of unpredictability. Despite his afflictions, George IV presided over a pivotal time in history, witnessing the end of the Napoleonic Wars and the radical reshaping of Europe at the Congress of Vienna. Yet, as health issues pulled him away from the forefront, he became a figure shrouded in privacy and ritual rather than engaging directly with the seismic shifts occurring around him. Decisions were made in his name, while public appearances dwindled, staged with effort and extravagance to mask his ailments, dripped in diamonds and ensconced in modified carriages that scarcely concealed the pain of his reality. However, the facade couldn't endure eternally. By the end of his reign, George IV had become a shell of his former self, plagued by swelling limbs, heart troubles, and an unyielding sense of discomfort that confined him to his bed for hours. Reports from his final days detail nights punctuated by complaints of pressure and heat, desperate for assistance merely to sit upright. He passed away in 1830, a composite figure shattered by years of excess. Yet, his legacy reached beyond personal struggle. He bequeathed a monarchy on edge, rife with debt, a citizenry growing wary of royal opulence, and a shifting paradigm of kingship that could no longer thrive on mere spectacle. In George IV's decline lay a profound truth, illustrating how the physical degeneration of a ruler mirrors the fragility of inherited authority. His successor, brother William IV, was destined to navigate this evolving landscape, learning firsthand that effective leadership does not rely on grandeur, but rather on acknowledging the discomforts and vulnerabilities of his time in an age where unchallenged sovereignty was slipping quietly into the annals of history. In the sweeping drama of British royalty, William IV, who reigned from 1830 to 1837, emerges as a figure of simplicity contrasting sharply with the extravagance of his predecessor, George IV. At 64, William took the throne, a latecomer to the world of power, shaped by years spent on the fringes of royal life. Widely recognized as Sailor Billy rather than a monarch, he held a modest existence with his long-term partner, appearing less like a king and more like an eccentric family member. Few anticipated significant change when he ascended, yet William would oversee a monumental parliamentary reform amidst the gradual decline of his own health. His afflictions went largely unnoticed, unlike the headline-grabbing ailments of George IV. Instead, they crept upon him quietly, manifesting through chronic fatigue and difficulty breathing, starkly contrasting with the imagery of a dramatic downfall. Each morning, he woke a bit more weary than before, embodying the weight of a nation in flux. Inheriting a system fraught with discontent, William was acutely aware of the evolving political landscape. He understood the necessity for reform, yielding to the passage of the 1832 Reform Act, which introduced critical changes despite his personal challenges. By 1833, however, whispers of his declining strength grew louder, marked by cancelled engagements and increasing fatigue, his body speaking truths he could no longer ignore. Though plagued by chronic edema, historically known as dropsy, William continued to fulfill his duties, albeit at a cost. Each appearance wore him down further, leading to visible exhaustion and discomfort. There were moments when he joked about death, expressing a stark realism about his own transient role in history and the state of the monarchy, recognizing himself as a steward for change rather than a revolutionary force. As the days passed, his health declined sharply, leading to anxieties about succession. By the spring of 1837, it was clear that the crown would soon pass to his niece, the young Victoria, heralding a new epoch. William IV passing on June 20th, 1837, was marked by a quietude that belied the significance of his reign. For in his unremarkable end lies a profound narrative of quiet decline, a testament to the resilience in merely allowing space for what was yet to come, a world on the brink of extensive transformation driven by industrial advancements and imperial ambitions. The royal narrative would not end here. Following William, his son, George V, would navigate an entirely altered reality burdened by modern warfare and an expansive media landscape. Kings could no longer shield their vulnerabilities away from the public eye, as the weight of expectation clashed with palpable human fragility. In the annals of British history, one figure stands out, George V, who reigned from 1910 to 1936, a monarch not known for charisma or poetic grace. He was, by all accounts, a man of simple endurance, clad in impeccable uniforms and silent resolve. Raised as the second son, his ascent to the throne came only after the tragic passing of his elder brother, Prince Albert Victor. Lacking the charm of royalty's golden children, George embodied practicality amidst the upheavals of the 20th century, his main attributes being steadfastness and restraint. This king, though seemingly unwavering, was a lifelong chain-smoker, indulging consistently in pipes and cigars, a habit that etched deeper marks on his health than anyone could foresee. As the years rolled into the 1920s, the ramifications of his smoking became undeniable. A persistent cough, diminishing stamina, and moments of breathlessness that revealed a growing struggle hidden from the public eye. Diagnosed with bronchitis, a term too broad to capture the genuine decay of his lungs, George's state deteriorated, forcing adjustments even in his royal engagements, making simple tasks a strain. By 1935, the king's use of supplemental oxygen became routine within palace walls, though outside, he maintained a facade of royal dignity. Insider accounts noted his diminishing presence, with carefully curated appearances that masked the reality of a health decline. The king's final public act, celebrating his silver jubilee, juxtaposed resounding applause with his silent suffering. Behind the curtain, he retreated into his cough-drenched linen. When George V passed in January 1936, his death was handled with clinical precision, his physician ensuring the ending was both dignified and timely. Yet, his illness raised profound questions about the monarchy's resilience, now appearing like a museum piece sustained through sheer will. His successor, George VI, would soon confront the same challenges of symbolizing strength despite his own struggles. Born Albert Frederick Arthur George in 1895, he was the second son of George V, a quiet soul thrust into a throne he never desired, burdened with an obligation to communicate amid his stutter. Known affectionately as Bertie, his early life was marked by a crippling speech impediment, making public speaking a dreaded endeavor. When his brother's abdication thrust him into kingship, Bertie's voice, a beacon of anxiety, became a public concern amidst the backdrop of monarchy in crisis. Confronting his stammer became pivotal, leading to an unexpected alliance with an Australian speech therapist, Lionel Logg. Through persistent effort, Bertie learned not just to speak but to resonate with authenticity. As World War II loomed, his deliberate style became a source of unity. Each hesitant word birthed sincerity, a welcome reprieve from the polished orations of tradition. Yet beneath his perseverance lay an ongoing battle with health issues exacerbated by wartime stress, culminating in chronic ulcers and lung cancer, conditions never publicly acknowledged. He breathed his last in 1952 at Sandringham, quietly resting in sleep. The legacy of George VI remains significant, not for traditional kingship, but for triumph over imperfection. His stutter became emblematic of a monarch striving for connection, reminding a nation of the beauty found in listening amidst the struggle for speech. And as the stage for kingship shifted, Robert III of Scotland stepped into a realm where physicality, not mere words, would define the walls of power. Truly, the thrones held more than mere crowns. They carried the weight of very human stories, fraught with vulnerabilities hidden beneath regal facades. In the annals of Scottish history, the figure of Robert III stands as a poignant chapter, one of a ruler trapped in the helpless grip of his own failing body. It's a rarity for a king to openly show such vulnerability, but Robert, who ascended the throne unable to walk without aid, became a testament to the fragile nature of sovereignty. Born John Stuart around 1337, he was the firstborn of Robert II and initially had all the hallmarks of a promising knight, fierce in battle and poised for greatness. Yet, amidst the promise, an accident, possibly a riding mishap, struck in his middle years, robbing him of his physical capabilities. The details remain elusive, typical of medieval accounts. Some chroniclers note he was kicked by a horse, while others insist he was trampled. The result was a debilitating injury, likely rendering him partially paralyzed. From that moment, he required assistance for every public engagement, a significant political setback in a realm where martial might defined rulership. Seizing the opportunity to redefine his narrative, he transformed his name from John to Robert, perhaps to sever ties with the infamous King John Balliol, whose legacy was mired in weakness. However, no amount of rebranding could alter his condition. Control slipped into the hands of his younger brother, Robert, Duke of Albany, who effectively assumed the reins of governance. Robert III became more of a figurehead, participating in ceremonial duties while wielding no real power. The poignant tragedy lies in his acute awareness of his diminished standing. Even without formally stepping down, his silence spoke volumes, a stark presence marred by inaction. The crushing blow came with the tragic demise of his eldest son, David, Duke of Rothay, in 1402. David, a beacon of hope and vitality amidst Robert's incapacitated rule, fell victim to suspect circumstances following his imprisonment by Albany. Officially declared ill, his loss echoed with dark political implications. Helpless to act and unable to visit his son's grave without assistance, Robert lamented his fate, branding himself unworthy. In a bid to secure his lineage, he sent his youngest son, James, away by sea, yet tragedy struck again as English forces captured the vessel, ensnaring James in a lengthy captivity. Robert III's life culminated in 1406, marked by solitude and defeat. His body had betrayed him. His authority was virtually non-existent. With the kingdom adrift in his absence, he exemplified the precarious facade of kingship, where the king's physical capabilities dictated his reign. Yet, as Robert's tale unfolded amid the shadows of his disability, the following monarch would be distinguished by a different kind of uniqueness, one marked not by frailty but by the vividness of his very skin, a birthmark that would shape his destiny in the treacherous landscape of medieval politics. James II of Scotland, reigning from 1437 to 1460, carved a unique legacy, not merely through his deeds in war or governance, but for something much more peculiar, a striking mark upon his visage. It wasn't just a poetic expression but a genuine and conspicuous red stain, a port wine mark, potentially stretching from cheek to jaw. This benign condition took on a life of its own in the politically charged world of 15th century Scotland, shaping public perception. James, whose fiery countenance earned him the moniker Fiery Face, ascended to the crown at merely 6 years old following the assassination of his father, James I. The circumstances surrounding his rise were steeped in intrigue, as Scotland's power was being manoeuvred by factions eager to manipulate the young monarch. As James matured, the shadows of ambitious nobles loomed large, with his appearances meticulously orchestrated and his authority constantly undermined. At this time, medieval beliefs fancied that physical imperfections foretold moral failings. Many interpreted the king's visible mark as a sign of divine wrath or an omen of future turmoil. Yet, James was determined not to be constrained by it. As he reached adolescence, he exuded a fiery resolve, growing increasingly at odds with his noble caregivers. By his 20s, he sought to break free from their grip. The pivotal moment arrived in 1452 when the Black Douglases, who wielded great power in Scotland, threatened the stability of the monarchy. James cunningly invited the 8th Earl of Douglas to Stirling Castle under the pretense of safety, but in a shocking twist of fate, he confronted and stabbed the Earl himself, marking a decisive turning point. This violent act was framed as an assertion of royal authority, a clear indication that the boy king had transformed into a determined ruler. Following this, James waged war against the Douglases, stripping them of their titles and lands, re-establishing the monarchy as a formidable force within Scotland. The scar on his face remained a notable feature, yet there's scant evidence that he sought to conceal it. Contemporary artistic portrayals were largely symbolic, offering little visual clarity, but historical accounts confirm its presence. James did not hide behind masks or elaborate clothing. Instead, he embraced his unique identity, making it integral to his reign. However, his reign was tragically brief. In 1460, while besieging the vital Roxburgh Castle, he became a victim of a catastrophic cannon explosion, an ironic twist befitting the legacy of fiery face, felled by fire. The very symbol that marked him from birth sealed his fate in a moment of chaos. With James II gone, his young son, James III, now took the throne, the legacy of child kings enduring amidst Scotland's turbulent landscape. Yet, with James II marked by fate, another figure emerged, Malcolm IV, untouched by such scars, set apart not by prophecy, but by the relentless passage of time itself. In the annals of Scotland's history, one name resonates with a peculiar blend of fragility and undisputed lineage. Malcolm IV, known as Malcolm the Maiden. Ascending to the throne at the tender age of 12, he ruled for a brief 12 years, yet his time in power was overshadowed by a persistent physical ailment that belied his royal status. Born in 1141 as the firstborn to Henry of Scotland, and the grandson of the politically shrewd King David I, Malcolm had the weighty legacy of reform and aspiration placed upon his slender shoulders. His coronation in 1153 at Scone heralded the start of his kingship, yet it often felt more a mere formality than a true beginning, as he was characterized by chroniclers as pale and frail. Marriage and heirs remained elusive for this king, whose very title shifted from an honorific description of his virtue to an unsettling euphemism for his weakness. While he navigated the turbulent waters of political strife, securing peace through pacts with Henry II of England, his actions were criticized as weakness rather than diplomacy. This gentle approach led to speculation. When he absented himself from battles or rejected strategic marriages, whispers of ill health and inability circled among the nobles. The cause of Malcolm's health issues remained shrouded in mystery. Speculations range from tuberculosis to other debilitating conditions that stunted his growth. He contrasted sharply with his younger brother, William, who embodied the vigor of leadership. As time passed, Malcolm's condition worsened, leading to his withdrawal from the court and a gradual retreat from public life. Ultimately, at the fragile age of 24, he passed away, leaving behind a legacy that is both poignant and subtly impactful. Transitioning from the Scottish throne, we now venture into the rugged landscapes of Gwynedd, where another remarkable figure, Llywelyn the Great, once reigned amid the mountains and valleys. An architect of the last great consolidation of medieval Wales, he transcended the confines of mere warfare, emerging as an astute statesman. With the remarkable ability to negotiate with the English nobility on nearly equal footing, Llywelyn's rule epitomized a masterful blend of martial prowess and diplomacy. Yet history, in its typical paradox, casts shadows even upon the brightest of achievements. As we explore the intertwined destinies of these kings, we witness the struggles not merely of individual character but of the very nature of authority and legacy, echoing through time the lessons of strength, vulnerability, and the unpredictable fates of those who wear the crown. But the saga of Llywelyn transcended the battlefield. It quietly concluded, much like countless royal narratives, with the gradual and unceremonious betrayal of his own body. Not through treachery or combat, but through a debilitating stroke, a sovereign silenced mid-thought. Born around 1173, he was the grandson of Ongwaing, the formidable patriarch of North Wales, whose lineage spent years embroiled in conflict over meagre inheritances. Amid this turmoil, Llywelyn matured and, like many overlooked younger sons, carved a significant role through warfare. By 1200, he had adept navigated around his adversaries, asserting his reign over much of Gwynedd. In the following 20 years, he expanded his dominion further, marrying the illegitimate daughter of John of England, skillfully negotiating with the Plantagenet crown, and by the 1230s, he styled himself not just as Prince of Gwynedd but as Prince of all Wales. He was indeed groundbreaking. Llywelyn was the first Welsh leader to lay down a semblance of centralized authority amid the fragmented cantrefs and rugged strongholds. But as the 1230s progressed, the tides began to turn. Historical accounts reveal that Llywelyn started to fade from the public sphere. His gait slowed, and his speech grew erratic. By 1237, chroniclers discreetly acknowledged what the royal court couldn't ignore. The prince had endured a paralyzing stroke. Whether it struck suddenly or developed gradually remains unclear, but its repercussions were irreversible. Llywelyn was left unable to govern directly. Sources describe him as partially incapacitated, unable to walk, and possibly limited in speech and command. This was no mere illness to be remedied with herbs. It epitomized a profound collapse of the very man who once galloped through mountain paths at the head of his armies. While the stroke didn't claim his life, it expelled him from power. As the reins of authority shifted to his son and designated heir, the dynamics of succession unfolded amidst customary solemnity and apprehension. The principality had been upheld mainly by Llywelyn's charisma and military prowess, and his sudden silence posed a constitutional conundrum. The realm was not structured to operate on protocol. It thrived on the vitality of presence. Llywelyn's once assertive figure now appeared only in managed displays, sitting, composed, yet distant. He breathed his last in 1240 at Aberconwy Abbey, where he had retreated in those final years to focus on prayer, contemplation, and tranquility. The prince who once stood defiantly against King John and reshaped his nation departed the stage like a monk, quietly, unnoticed, destined to be half-remembered amidst the rising clamour of generations that followed. His passing left behind a duality, an emptiness and a potential legacy, a template for Welsh unity. Although his paralysis curtailed his rule, it didn't erase what he had achieved. He demonstrated that a Welsh leader could adept wield legitimacy, diplomacy, and law, forging alliances and transcending the burdens of past inheritances. Yet, his tale often concludes with a poignant postscript, devoid of grandeur. He did not perish amidst glory, war, or flame. He merely ceased to act. His corporeal form endured as long as it could, then succumbed. However, if Llywelyn's narrative chronicles ambition thwarted by a physical decline, the follow-up story unveils how kingship could disintegrate, not through age or malady, but through a solitary, tangible flaw. In ancient Ireland, the kings had to embody perfection, or else abdication was their only fate. Consider the tales of Congal Catch and Cormac Mac, celebrated figures from early Irish history. Ireland's political systems were shaped by Briartha laws, where poetics intertwined with brutality, showcasing a strange obsession with symmetry. Under these laws, a king had to be entirely unblemished, not just in virtue or lineage, but in physical form. A concealed injury might be overlooked, a slight limp forgiven. However, a significant permanent deformity spelled disqualification. This leads us to the notorious cases of abdications rooted in blemishes. Let us first dissect the narrative of Congal Catch, the King of Ulster, who for a brief period claimed the high kingship of Ireland. His tale is legendary, at once poetic and absurd. During a feast, an unassuming bee stings Congal in the eye. This sting results in the loss of sight in one eye, rendering him half-blind. In many cultures, this might evoke sympathy, but in ancient Ireland, it rendered him unfit to reign. Tradition dictated that Congal had to relinquish the high kingship of Tara, the ceremonial heart of Irish sovereignty, as his impaired vision infringed upon the legal mandate for a king to be whole and unblemished. Yet Congal would not accept this demotion lightly. He spent years consolidating alliances, gathering support, and ultimately leading a rebel army, including mercenaries from Scotland, against the reigning High King at the Battle of Marrath. The result? Utter disaster. Congal was vanquished and met his demise, all due to a mere bee, and a law that intertwined kingship with superficial perfection. And then there's Cormac Mac. His narrative is more ancient and mythic, yet equally tragic. A revered king, renowned for his wisdom and fairness, Cormac oversaw a flourishing kingdom during his reign. He introduced progressive legal codes, reformed traditions, and presided over an era rich in storytelling and political clarity. Yet, as the legends narrate, Cormac loses an eye. The cause varies across tales. Whether it be a consequence of battle or divine punishment, the outcome remains unaltered. Now blemished, he could no longer rule from Tara. He accepted his fate with equanimity, retreating to a lesser court where he spent his days as a philosopher, writing, advising, and waiting for the end. Despite his unchallenged wisdom and enduring legal frameworks, he could no longer wear the crown, as dictated by law. The stories of Congal and Cormac expose a disquieting truth about kingship, beyond Ireland and into the annals of history itself. The reality shines vividly. The crown often relies more on appearance than capability. Positioned in a society where physical perfection equated to moral legitimacy, the corporeal form became an examined and politicized asset capable of unmaking a ruler far quicker than any military defeat. Thus we conclude where we began, not with triumph or victory, but with contradiction. Kings who could not walk, rulers who could not breathe, monarchs silenced, their corporeal forms failing to align with the legends they inspired. Yet they ruled, some briefly, others boldly, until the resilience of the body simply ceased, leaving behind only echoes of their once mighty reigns.